Yes, but then I feel as silly as a non-minority woman to talk about minority issues. So I think that's really just. But we actually have
and we go to the app.
we have a rule in the OSCE that we don't do.
So now, hello, this is an audio test.
So we try also not to do all women panels, but we try to, unfortunately, we're not allowed to go beyond that because we're very binary, but we try to have different faces, and I think we don't need all male panels, but we need more men to speak on gender equality and sort of show their face for the cause and contribute to the discussion. So it was very good to have you. Yeah, I discovered a lot of new things when looking at the work you do. I haven't been working on minorities for long, so we'll definitely look into that a little bit more. There's a lot to read for me. Yes, thank you. Bye. Yes, we do. We have roughly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. 18 attendees on the website. So we have in the capacity to also like in a little bit more room. But if you don't have registration, when so much is going on. Unfortunately, done all of this. Yeah. But I think it's a decent number. No, I don't think it's the more. I mean, there's some. No, I was in the program yesterday, and I was probably deciding what do I go to. Something just short notice. I was thinking how much more would it Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
I was a little bit nervous in the beginning because it was my first panel with high-level people. I didn't want to read the protocol, but I'm happy. I think it went well. Thank you for being here and supporting. I'm leaving in the evening, but I hope I'll see you again some capacity or another.
The audio is set correctly. Go.
Oh yeah, you got the character. It's a lot. Yes, I can share. And it will be posted on the. It is already. It's there. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bring more the lady. Yes. The best way and charity yes, no, it's of course. Yes. And then I think we'll do
Nice to meet you in person.
yeah, Thursday, when the graduation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You got your arrest.
No, welcome. Yes. Yes.
Hi. Nice to meet you. Hi. Nice to meet you. Yes, you're the moderator. Our yes, we have a meeting afterwards, I think. Yes. We would also talk about the Parliament. Yes. Hi. We'll see you guys in half an hour. Is it?
Yes.
What do you No. Next time. Yeah, in 15 minutes. Thank you. Have you? Io Catania.
Should I figure the pronunciation that
And I have don't worry. About I know.
Well, that's cool. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this session. The topic today is clearing the path to peace, humanitarian demining in peace agreements. My name is Auzif Tarakan. I'm the co-director at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue's humanitarian program. This is a topic which comes from the peace mediation sector, and for us, the humanitarian demining sector is an area which we would like to collaborate with more, and is an area which we are exploring actively, and which is why it's a great pleasure to be here moderating this panel. Contamination is a direct barrier to post-conflict recovery. It prevents the safe return of displaced populations, disrupts livelihoods, and hinders service provision. Landmines and other explosive debris of war are also a psychological legacy and a deadly reminder of past or present conflict. It's also a tool of peace. Humanitarian demining can act as a useful tool at many phases of the peace process, both formal and informal, from an entry point through negotiation and implementation of peace agreements. The goal of our discussion really is to explore how this potential can be consistently translated into practice, making mine action an integral element and a constructive component of peace agreements. And I think for us as HT, we really do see this as potentially also an interesting entry point, particularly in terms of peace mediation to engage with hard-to-reach actors, particularly military actors. We feel that it is a sector, particularly the humanitarian demining sector, which is depth and networks, which could be useful for us. I'd like to now introduce the speakers on this panel. We have with us Ambassador Tim Enderlin, who is the head of the Peace and Human Rights Division, the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Switzerland. We have Ambassador Tobias Privatelli, who is the director of the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining. We have Ms. Donatella Rostiano, I'm sorry, Global Peacebuilding Program Coordinator at Interpeace. And we have Mr. Antonio Salvatore Aramento, who is the Chief Mine Action Program of the United Nations Mine Action Services in Colombia. Maybe just to open up this session, maybe I'll address the first question to you, Ambassador Enderlin. Switzerland has been a steadfast supporter of international humanitarian law, including the landmark international conventions aiming to avoid the terrible humanitarian consequences of landmines and other explosive devices, like the Ottawa and Oslo conventions. So how do you see the role of these conventions today to help prepare for peace and to sustain them?
Thank you, Seb, and good afternoon to everyone. Very happy and glad that I can be part of this panel today and talk a little bit also about the role Switzerland is having in this important field of mine action. Landmark conventions, you say, and indeed, how we consider the Ottawa and Oslo conventions to be milestones in humanitarian disarmament. It was through those conventions that the international community recognized that some methods and means of warfare are almost impossible to use in a way that is compatible with the key principles of humanitarian law. And with this, I think also goes along that, goes along the realization that the suffering they cause, all those landmines, they cause to civilians far outweighs the potential military use. To look into maybe a little bit, as you make the link between the conventions and peace, maybe 3 points I want to highlight here on where we could, as Switzerland, where do we see possible links. The first one is regarding the negative impact of landmines on a sustainable peace, and I think this is probably clear to everyone. Landmines and other explosive weapons cause devastating humanitarian impacts even decades after the end of conflicts. As such, they constitute a serious impediment to development and reconstruction. And every new incident, I think that's also important to note, can reopen old wounds and in extreme cases even lead to resurgence of violence and renewed fighting. So what they are, those weapons, they are a constant reminder of the hurt that was caused and can therefore render sustainable peace very difficult to attain. By ratifying the conventions and therefore accepting the obligation to refrain from the use of landmines and cluster munition during armed conflict, when the temptation actually to use them may be the highest, states make a concrete and important commitment to peace and to saving civilian lives. So it's not only about the immediate impact of joining a convention, it's also about it's the far side view in terms of commitment to peace and saving lives. Second, and I think this is something that we only slowly discover these days, if I may say so, that the conventions can offer and actually do offer mechanism to deal with these matters on a diplomatic level than rather just through force. What I want to say is that channeling conflict over landmines into the procedures of the convention is possible and hopefully also a promising pathway to resolution that does not include armed force. And the example I can mention here, and I think you're aware of that, is the case between Thailand and Cambodia, where Thailand actually has invoked the compliance mechanism according to Article 8. And I think we are all very keen to see how that procedure will move on and continue. And thirdly and finally, the last point I want to make here in showing up this link between the conventions and peace is sustaining peace through mine action commitments. Past the negotiation phase of peace agreements, the conventions provide a framework for accountability and delivery in mine action. The conventions mandate clearance and stockpile destruction with clear timelines from their adoption, as well as the need for regular reporting. And they also require risk education and victim assistance to be conducted to deal with the humanitarian consequences of those weapons. So these mechanisms, in our view, allow other actors to hold the states to account for their commitments to concrete steps towards sustaining peace. And I think I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Privatelli, maybe the next question is addressed to you. Essentially, to set the stage, GICHD frames mine action as a versatile tool for peace. Could you outline how it has been strategically integrated into peace processes to deliver, in particular, peace dividends, such as confidence building measures, enabling returns, etc.?
Thank you so much, Youssef. It's a quite unique opportunity to bring the peace building community and the mine action community together here in Geneva. Thanks to the co-organizer for this. Absolutely. I have a slide here which shows how mine action can contribute in different phases of the conflict cycle, the so-called conflict cycle. But first of all, we'd like to underline that mine contamination, risks of explosive ordnance are still a huge problem, an increasing problem. We have more victims, we have a high amount of contaminated land, and 37% of the victims are children. 84% of the victims are civilians, and about 58 states are affected by the problem. So it's not, as we hoped 5-6 years ago, a disappearing problem, but it is an increasing problem. Now, on this slide, you see examples at which stage of the conflict cycle mine action can play a role. It is not only a cleanup mechanism post-conflict, it can have a preventative impact. And that's what Ambassador Enderlin described right now. The convention, I think, themselves had a preventative impact. If you want to earn money, don't produce landmines. It's not a lucrative business anymore. It has been 30 years ago. Today, we have 10, 11 producing countries, and there is little trade. It has gone down massively. We also know that 55 million landmines have been destroyed in stockpiles over the last 30 years, and that's the impact of the Ottawa Convention. So when it comes to the use of indiscriminate weapons, such as landmines, cluster munition, improvised explosive devices, we really see an impact of the conventions, and that's in the pre-conflict phase, very important to see that preventative impact. Now, during conflict, it is sometimes extremely difficult to do clearance. We saw very specific activities of mine clearance in Yemen between North and South, agreed with the facilitation of UN Mine Action Service, UNOPS were involved, but that's very, very punctual. In Gaza, we did not see any serious mine clearance so far, but only the removal of explosive ordnance at certain points where humanitarian assistance was provided to the population. Now, when a peace process starts, leading then to a peace agreement or ceasefire agreement, the potential of mine action, of course, increases, is there. We have been asked as a GICHD to provide formulation for ceasefire agreements, peace agreements on mine action. And we always say the best thing in confidence building is to exchange information, to exchange maps. So if the landmines have been put in the ground by soldiers or machines, very often there are maps available in the ministries of defense. If they have been thrown by artillery aircraft, it's a different situation. You don't know exactly where the landmines are held. Now, exchange of information is a key element, and we have it in certain peace agreements. I think we have a formulation in the Dayton Peace Agreement on Bosnia-Herzegovina. In other cases, peace agreements indicate, highlight mine action as a precondition for recovery, reconstruction, reestablishment of institutions, and the return of IDPs and refugees. We have that in the case of Sudan. Ceasefire agreement 2004 states very clearly that without mine clearance, the UN will not be able to establish a peace support mission. So that link is very clear in certain agreements. In Arusha agreement for Burundi 2000, we have the formulation that mine clearance is needed for humanitarian corridors. We have a lot of examples of that kind. In the case of Eritrea and Ethiopia, the formulation is that without mine clearance, there can't be any return of the civilian administration. So you see that link, it is a precondition, has been said many times. Then after the conflict, let's say after the immediate violence, we often see interesting forms of cooperation. So in the case of Croatia and Serbia after the Yugoslav war, we had joint clearing teams at the border. That's quite unique. Also between Peru and Ecuador. Nick and the team did a study on cross-border mine clearance recently, and they also did a study, I think published yesterday, on peace agreements and mine action. So you'll find more details there. But I think a particularly exciting example is Colombia, because in the case of the Colombian peace agreement, you have an indication of the role of competence in mine action, very clear formulations, and you link mine action to transitional justice. I think that's a fascinating mechanism. I think our colleague will give us more information, but all in all, it is very important to see that we play a role, that we are in mine action linked between the humanitarian world, between accountability, disarmament, and peace building. Thank you.
Practice to build trust between adversaries. And also, I think just a follow-up, a link question about what can we take, the broader lessons we can take from the Colombia experience. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, all. It's absolutely a privilege to be here in this distinguished panel. Good morning also to our colleagues and the people listening on streaming from Colombia, and from also, I guess, our UNMAS office in New York. Again, it's a great opportunity to discuss from a very different perspective, and I believe that the Colombia case can pretty much help to understand and basically see this different role of mine action. So essentially, I will start from a question. So normally there is a correlation, a causation, or a unidirectional relation between peace agreements and mine action. So normally this is clear to the general public. Then when there is a peace agreement signed, clearance operations can start, victims normally start reducing. But what about the other way around? What about the relation of mine action and how mine action as and contributes and supports peace agreement? So let's try to explore this, and I will use two examples. But before that, I will start just maybe giving you a little bit of background, because you might know, of course, that there is a peace agreement in Colombia that is currently regulating the situation. So the peace agreement was signed in 2016, but there was a large process of negotiation from 2012 until 2016, where the final peace agreement with the main actor, the extinguished FARC guerrilla, was achieved. So UNMAS started operated in Colombia since 2010, and I believe UNMAS had a very critical role in mainstreaming mine action into the peace agreement. So back then there was the Cuba process. So Cuba was facilitating this negotiation talk together with other countries that were guaranteeing for the peace process. So it was possible to provide input back then, and also to make sure that mine action was referenced and was used as a key element to reach the final peace agreement. So now the former FARC are extinguished. In 2017, after the peace agreement, they fully disarmed and transitioned to a political party. But then how the political and the final peace agreement translate and technically was implemented, and now mine action and which role mine action then had in this important process. So to use an example as requested, I will start from Humanicemos DH. Humanicemos DH is basically an organization that was built from scratch right after the peace process. And basically, UNMAS also play a critical role in the capacity building of this organization. So what is so special, what is so specific about this organization? This organization was fully composed by former combatants and signatory of the peace agreement. So this is a very crucial element that I kindly ask you to focus on, because thanks to this element, there is a clear link on reintegration, of course, strategy for those combatants. We are talking at the moment of 90 combatants that are composing the organization, which is operating in different areas of the country. And I take also the opportunity to thank very much the generous contribution of the Swiss government, because it's also thanks to the Swiss government that Humanicemos is now able to operate on the ground at this time of very scarce and difficult funds and resources to achieve. So back to Humanicemos. Humanicemos is now, thanks to this capacity building process, an organization that is certified by the Colombian government and is basically a demining operator, but also to mention two key elements that Ambassador Enderlin mentioned before, is also conducting victim assistance and explosive ordnance risk education. But much more beyond that, Humanicemos is an example of how this organization is building back and building peace on the ground with communities that were previously affected by the conflicts. So this is very important because this organization contributed essentially to reconciliation and to the peace building effort. Plus, it's a key element that ensure livelihoods for the participant and also former combatants. As a second example, very quickly, I will mention, and maybe just to link up with what Ambassador Privitelli mentioned before about the role of the information exchange during a negotiation process. There is basically, as a consequence of the peace process, there was a mechanism that was built together with the United Nations system, specifically the United Nations Verification Mission, the UNTMC, UNMAS, the government of Colombia, and former combatants. So basically, what the agreement, the final peace agreement was specifying was that one of the elements that former combatants should provide was information, key strategical, tactical information about the setup of explosive ordnances and landmines. So this was critical element in the negotiation, in the conversation, because enable building trust among parts. And as a result of this project is a very long-term project. This cannot happen overnight. It's something that takes time. It started in 2020. And thanks to this project, it was possible to georeference the location of more than 5,000 landmines, and also to understand how those elements were strategically and tactically used. In terms of outcomes, it was also possible to improve operational efficiency of operators, because this information was double-checked by UNMAS and then provided to the government and also to the operators, improving as a result efficiency, but also providing valuable element of analysis for the studies and the public in general. And finally, there was also the development of a document of historical memory and non-repetition. So to conclude my statement, I think this was a clear example of building trust between former adversary and contribute to reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ms. Rostano, maybe to complete our opening picture, how does a peace-building organization like Interpeace ensure that mine action contributes to local ownership and remains inclusive, and is not really seen just as a purely technical issue?
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting Interpeace at this reflection and common reflection on humanitarian demining and peace agreements. And I think I would start by slightly reframing the question, because I think the right question from the point of view of Interpeace would be how organizations like Interpeace ensure through local ownership the effectiveness of mine action, for example. So you see, the point of view is slightly different, and I think this is what draws our action and with the communities we work with. I think from Interpeace perspective, demining is definitely not a technical or a humanitarian imperative. It's part of a peace-building process. It's a peace-building act, as we are speaking about peace-building in action. And as Interpeace, we have a fundamental belief that peace cannot be imported, is not imported from outside, is built from within. And this principle guides our approach to peace building and therefore also to mine action. Ensuring that mine action is not an external something, an external process, an external decision that is then technically imposed on conflict and post-conflict, especially post-conflict setting, but must be a process that empowers communities to reclaim also their land, their agency, their future, the way they live and they will live as a community. So we see and we recognize that mine action should be and must be integrated in broader peace building and development efforts. And so it's not only about removing physical threats, it is about restoring social cohesion, dignity, enabling livelihoods, and then setting the basis and laying the basis for long-term reconciliation. This can only come through local ownership, through local and participatory methods, capacity strengthening, accompaniment, working together, identifying where are the problems, and with the communities that are affected by, of course, conflict and post-conflict in post-conflict settings. And so I think for us, there are four main, let's say, points, if I may, that are important in this importance of local ownership in mine action. The first one is building, to look at the mining as trust-building measure. Interpeace has experiences of working across Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and through this work, through the work that we have done also with communities, we have seen that landmines perpetrates fear and division. with landmines, and I don't have to teach you this, you're much more expert than we are on landmines, but landmines, in a situation where there are landmines, communities remain isolated, livelihoods are disrupted, displaced population are unable to go back and to return to their homes and their lands. And so when the mining is integrated into peace agreement and is implemented in a transparent way, then it becomes a very powerful confidence building measure, and it becomes a measure through which dialogue, reconciliation, and healing is possible in communities. The second point is that indeed locally led demining has to be seen as a path to ownership and sustainability. Interpeace peace-building approach is grounded in local ownership, as I've been saying. Sustainable peace can only be built from those who live it, from those who are in the context, in the situation. It cannot be imported, it cannot be imposed from outside. And so the mining efforts must reflect this principle as well. When communities are, for example, involved in identifying the contaminated areas, setting the priorities, monitoring the process, that process itself becomes something different than just a technical process of the mining. It becomes very transformative for the communities and for the people living in those contexts. And it can empower local actors, it can strengthen social cohesion, ensures that the mining responds to the real needs of the population and of the communities. The third point is that we have a need to integrate, we see the need to integrate the mining into broader peace-building framework. And this is because the mining cannot bring peace in itself. It's not the act of cleaning and clearing land that brings peace. Peace is a very broad and it's a large framework, including, of course, aspects that cannot be seen in isolation. And this has to bring also transitional justice, security sector reform, inclusive governance. And so when you look, for example, at transitional justice, the survivors of landmine accidents often seek recognition, seek reparation, seek accountability. And the mining should also be linked to those aspects, to assisting the victims and offering, also participating into this justice mechanism. Security sector reform is also quite self-evident. The institutions that have laying mines are the institutions also that should be tasked with clearing the mines. But this transition should be also accompanied by reforms and especially building public trust. And then reintegration and reconciliation. So again, when you have the mining processes as part of a large peace building framework, then you have the return of displaced populations, reintegration of ex-combatants, but this can only be done in accompaniment with inclusive dialogue, supporting systems, and again, having local ownership of the whole process. And point number 4, to conclude, is the role of dialogue in inclusive processes. And here we believe in dialogue very much as a peace-building organization. In many contexts, the legacy of landmines is contested as well. And I think we have to look at landmines not just as a physical remnant, but as a narrative remnant of war. It's not only the act, the physical object that is there, it's the narrative around why those mines are there. The presence can invoke contested memories among communities, unresolved grievances a lot of the times, deep mistrust among communities or members of the communities. And so inclusive dialogue is essential for transformation, to transform these legacies. So involving diverse stakeholders in the mining, like such as survivors, ex-combatants, women, youth, traditional leaders, minorities in the communities, will definitely help in surfacing, you know, in allowing communities to dialogue and maybe disagree as well, but trying to find common ways of getting out of the situation, can build a shared understanding of also the historical, as we were saying, the narrative of the conflict, and definitely will strengthen social cohesion. So when communities can dialogue, when communities can work together in identifying what are the issues, the problems that need to be solved for the community, then social cohesion is strengthened. So I will stop here for this first question.
No, thank you for that very comprehensive overview. Ambassador Endel, maybe I could come back to you. In peace negotiations, we see that there's a risk that mine action is often just relegated to just the clearing of land. But the more comprehensive, human-centered aspect of that, like victim assistance, risk education, are often sidelined. So from the experience of the Swiss FDFA, what role can a more holistic mine action program have in facilitating peace building and reconciliation?
Indeed, I think that a comprehensive and holistic approach is crucial when we talk about mine action, and I think we already heard about it also from other panelists this afternoon. For us, what is first and foremost important to note is that all the 5 pillars of mine action need to be implemented in parallel. And when I say all the 5 pillars, what I mean is that includes clearance, destruction of stockpiles, risk education, victim assistance, and advocacy. In the end, what we must always have in mind is that the ultimate objective must be to reduce human suffering and enable sustainable peace and development, and to do that in the most effective way and in working parallel on those different pillars. I think this is probably the best way to ensure that in an already very difficult and complex field. Maybe to be a bit more concrete, also 3 points I could highlight here with regard to the holistic approach you have mentioned. And the first one is, I think, very much in line also with what Ambassador Privitelli has already mentioned before, referencing here the mine action taking part earlier in the conflict cycle already. I think this is something, Tobias, we witness now in recent years to come up more and more. So to have mine action already in place while the fighting is still ongoing, that's of course first and foremost of high risk for all those that can be targeted, for the mine action professionals, can be targeted during their work, be it by mistake or on purpose. And that's certainly something that, of course, needs to be taken into account. On the other side, I think what we also have to see that the earlier we move in with mine action and mine clearance, this enables us to open the field and to build confidence. And to build confidence through technical cooperation on comprehensive mine action, and to do this across the conflict lines. For my division working in peace, this is a crucial aspect. In all those different conflicts we work in as mediators, facilitators, what we are looking for is entry points. We look for platforms for dialogue. How can we facilitate? How can we bridge between conflicting parties? And very often, if already entry points are difficult to find, and I think they're getting more and more difficult actually to find, because everything is politicized, starting with humanitarian support, unfortunately, very unfortunately, but that's how it is. but still the more technical an aspect is, I think the more can we also work on peace, conflict resolution, finding some confidence without necessarily talking of it, but working on the technical aspects of things. And I think that's for us and the division I'm working in, that's a crucial point. And where this technical cooperation finally then also can succeed, parties are then able to build upon the resulting trust to approach each other. That would then be the next step, and to look into maybe more politically challenging questions in the framework of a conflict. So it can be the very beginning, the mine action, the technical cooperation, to go bigger afterwards once a certain trust, or minimal trust at least, is established. All this having said, of course, I think, Tobias, you mentioned that as well, the ceasefire agreements, they remain important also in terms of creating a basis and a good opportunity to approach the question of mine action in a contested territory, and which already a bit more organized along a ceasefire and its implementation. The second point, and here again something that has been mentioned before already, and that's important for us in Switzerland and my division as well, is dealing with the past, transitional justice, and I want to highlight that through the victim assistance, which was already mentioned, victim assistance as restorative justice. So through the medical, psychological, socio-economic support to victims and survivors, I think we can constitute, or this can constitute, an act of restorative justice. And through that, it can acknowledge harm, and it can contribute to individual and societal healing, promoting reconciliation and reducing the risk of resurgence of violence. As long as we do not get clear with our past, as long as we are not able to work on reconciliation, I think we all know that durable peace is not possible. I think this is one of the examples and a field where Switzerland also has quite some expertise to offer in many of the conflicts we are working in, from Colombia, Syria, the Ukraine, Sri Lanka, not to forget it. We very much also focus, or one of the pillars often is transitional justice, or dealing with the past, as a precondition for durable peace. And also, like with mine action, the sooner we start it, the better it is in view of durable peace. And Ukraine, I think, is a very good example where actually we do that, and very much also on demand of the Ukrainians themselves, realizing that this is one of the important pillars if they think about peace in the future. So here also the reconstruction aspect that has been mentioned, I think, is important and shines out pretty clearly. And then third and final point is the comprehensive approach to mine action that can also be an enabler for humanitarian access and for long-term development. Also this we have already heard before. In this sense, saying that continuous community engagement can give communities a sense of being heard after being stripped of agency during conflict, and to stress how important that is. Here, an example for us is Colombia. It was mentioned already by Antonio before, so I want to be very short here. But Colombia for us, where we are active for more than 20 years now as Switzerland, is an interesting example and case of mine action being integrated into broader peace building efforts. And in Colombia, you do that through the National Mine Action Center, which is located under the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace, if I understood that correctly when I was visiting Colombia earlier this year. And I think with this, Colombia explicitly recognizes that linkage and very active, as you heard me, works on this. And that the Humanicemos was already mentioned. This, I think, really important projects undertaken by where mine action is undertaken by former combatants, and where us, and in particular my division, are very happy that we are able to support that. I leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maybe Mr. Armentano, picking up on some of the points which Ambassador Endelina touched on, could you sort of give us a bit more examples into how action on sensitive transnational justice issues linked to demining have worked in Colombia?
Yes, thank you. So again, I will start with a little bit of background, because of course it's quite a complex matter, the transitional justice. So it's important maybe to explain and to remember everyone that as a result of the 2016 peace agreements, there was an institution that was created. It's called the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, with the mandate from 2017 until 2037. So as you can see, there is a very large frame in terms of time that is required. So I'm sure my colleagues and friends for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace that are now listening in streaming will be very kind with me, as I'm not a lawyer. And but I'll try to do my best to explain the core concept. So essentially, the focus of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace is on justice, reparation, and non-repetition, with a particular approach on transitional justice. So of course, this is all, I mean, very, very important before even start talking about mine action, because the crucial component is actually the restorative role with the creation of a dialogue between victims and perpetrators. So now, again, a question for you, and to allow me to introduce the topic. How does maybe a relatively simple and straightforward element like mine action fit into a complex legal framework of transitional justice? So I believe this is a very good timing for the Geneva Peace Week, because actually in September, on 16th of September, there were the first two historical sentences and ruling from the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. And of course, we very welcome this initiative, and we commend, of course, the government of Colombia for this important result. So essentially, through this ruling, basically, mine action was a key element. At the same time, it was a restorative sanction for 7 former FARC leaders. So please allow me to quote part of this sentence very briefly, because what the Special Jurisdiction for Peace is saying is that, of course, mine action is important, but how it is developing its crucial role, essentially contributing to mine action as a highly relevant restorative function, as it allows the restoration of freedom, mobility, and security of affected communities. So essentially, through this first ruling of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, I'm very pleased to share with you that 20 specific mine action related measures were included in the sentence. So this is absolutely outstanding. And this is pretty much going far beyond demining, and including what are so-called, human-centered elements, mentioned again by Ambassador Enderlin, such as victim assistance and risk education. So this is a very new development, which again, it's an historical moment for the country, I believe. But it's important to highlight also as an example, as I was required to provide, that the Special Jurisdiction for Peace already started in the previous year the implementation of pilot restorative projects. So this is not something that has yet to be done. It was started as a pilot project on mine action. And basically, it's very interesting here because, again, Humanisemos played a crucial role because supported this process, but also, of course, the United Nations verification mission. And I take profit of this opportunity also to wish them good luck, because on the 30th of October, there's going to be discussed the new mandate of the UN verification mission. And I'm sure that all trust will be given to them, given the very important role they have in Colombia. But also UNMAS supported the process. Among the pilot project, there was this initiative called Safe Horizons, where former FARC combatants, but not only FARC combatants, also armed forces staff, which were also participating in crimes against humanity, work together on victim assistance and explosive risk education, supported by another local actor, which is Campaña Colombiana contra Minas, another local operator, and which provided trainings and capacity building. So just imagine how it is important. I mean, this cooperation between armed forces, former combatants, population, NGOs, demining operators, all together, basically moving things forward. So basically, just to conclude and wrap up, I think that transitional justice. I don't want to do an overstatement here, but I think the transitional justice is really changing the way mine action is carried out forward in Colombia, and basically it achieved an effective connection on the ground with mine action as a key element of this building, much beyond what we know as the standardized technical operation of clearing and demining. Thank you very much.
Sorry, yeah. So, Ambassador Patelli, maybe the next question, building on that recent research by GICHD, suggests that there are successful models, but the implementation of mine action and peace agreements remains spotty. And to that degree, what can we do to address that implementation gap? What can the international community do to reduce that gap?
Thank you so much. It's exactly as you say. So mine action is often not included in peace agreements, and it's often not implemented properly. I think I see 5 obstacles for that. Very briefly, one obstacle is that, of course, in many cases, a conflict is ended by a relatively simple ceasefire agreement with a limited scope, which is more or less only the cessation of hostilities, right? And that leads me to the second point. In many cases, we have a ceasefire line being more fortified after the ceasefire. So we have a front line, contact line in the middle of a country, and then landmines might be used for fortification reasons. And we might even see more landmines at this fortification line after the conflict. And the third point is, if you include landmines, cluster munition, other devices which are banned by international conventions, that means you recognize that you use them. And it's maybe not always easy for a government to acknowledge that they have been used. They are banned. We are looking now into court rulings of international courts. I found it fascinating when Antonio said about transitional justice in Colombia. We're looking into court rulings of international courts, whether the use of landmines are being considered by international courts as an aggravating factor in court rulings. We're looking into that. We don't know it because the big tribunals on Rwanda and Yugoslavia took place before the ratification of the 2 conventions. So I think that's an interesting question. And having them in a peace agreement means acknowledging that they have been used. That's difficult maybe in some contexts. The fourth point is that we have a lot of non-state actors involved in conflicts, and often they do not have access to industrially produced landmines or cluster munition. So they use improvised explosive devices. Are they regulated? We think yes. We think if an improvised explosive device is triggered by a victim, then it falls under the Ottawa Convention, right? But it's very difficult to regulate their use, their presence in a ceasefire agreement with a non-state actor. Sometimes these devices are produced almost in industrial conditions, like by the Islamic State in Iraq, and sometimes literally in the backyard or in a garage. That's point 4, which makes it difficult to have them in peace agreements. And the 5th point is that if mine action is not organized properly, it can be the starting point of tensions in a community in a worst case scenario, because different questions have to be answered. Whose land is being demined first, the priority setting? In Ukraine, the government is now introducing a system of using artificial intelligence in priority setting, with data on the GDP relevance of agricultural land and so on. Then also who is involved? Demining is job opportunities. For officers after conflict, it's an interesting area to be employed. But during a conflict, we often have many women engaged in demining. So there might be a tension between genders after the conflict, or between returnees and those who live there. So if the mine action sector is not organized in a fair and proper manner, it could in itself become a bone of contention. And then what could be done? I think it is very important internationally in UN setups that we always point to the crucial relevance of mine action for recovery, reconstruction, that we make that link, that we involve organizations like ours, UNMAS, the operators of mine action and so on, in the discussion on reconstruction. It starts, as Tim Endelin said, it starts very often with mine clearance to do anything else, to have access and to rebuild a country.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Rostano, maybe you sometimes see a disconnect between the very high-level peace agreements and community needs. So maybe drawing upon your experience of Interpeace and maybe other partners, could you give us an example of how you've ensured that these technical elements included in peace agreements are basically and you're able to bridge that gap, and so that they don't remain just at a very high level?
Yeah, thank you. And I would say even that more often than not, in peace processes, all the technical provisions that include, for example, mine action, but there are also security arrangement, disarmament, are decided at what we call the track 1, which is the very high level elite, political elite in the warring parties, without a meaningful and in-depth input and participation from civil society, which what we call the track 2 on the peace building process, or the local communities, which is what the track 3 of the peace building process. And this results in agreements we have seen so many times that lack legitimacy, fail to address the lived experiences of the people that are most affected by the conflict, which are the communities, the population, the people on the ground. And so our approach is an integration of these 3 levels, the track 1, the track 2, and the track 3. How do we do that? With strategies we put in place? For example, Interpeace organizes and facilitates inclusive dialogue platforms, so places of dialogues across the tracks. So again, not only the communities discussing about the problems, but across the tracks, communities with civil society. And by civil society, we intend larger civil society, not only the NGOs, but the larger spectrum of civil society actors. And then ensuring then in this way the community concerns, and for example, in this respect, because we're speaking about mine action, land access, trauma recovery, security, all these different aspects are heard by the national decision makers or the international decision makers in the peace building, in the peace process. a second mechanism is participatory research, for example. It's places like in DRC, in Democratic Republic of Congo, or in the Sahel, where, you know, involving communities in expressing what are their concerns, expressing what are the opinion on the peace building process, for example, is not only about, you know, for communities, is not only about to be able to express the fact that they're victims, but also to be able to express opinions on the peace process and the actors involved in the peace process. So by this participatory research, polling, this is where you ensure that communities have a say in this respect. Formal collaboration with state institutions also is a way, and we have a very specific example with the work of Interpeace in Rwanda, where Interpeace signed agreement with ministries to co-develop peace education curriculum, psychological support programs, and these technical elements are then shaped by the local consultations and are then embedded in national frameworks. And this is what we have done and we are presently doing also in Rwanda. And then, capacity building. So for example, ensuring that local actors are also trained to engage in those high-level discussion and high-level dialogues in a way that enables them to advocate in an effective way for the priorities, to influence priorities during negotiations. So just to give you maybe a more practical example, you know that the situation, the present situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you know, the M23 rebel group took over East Congo. So it's a very difficult situation. And what is happening at the moment is that there are a number of very high-level processes happening. There is the Washington process, what we call the Doha process, where basically only presidents, the head of the rebel groups are sitting to discuss peace. But none of the representatives of track 2 and track 3 in these processes are involved. We have in the DRC a very strong role played by the churches, the Catholic churches and the Protestant churches together, playing an immense role in DRC in identifying what are the path to peace and what should be the path to peace after decades of conflicts, bad governance, and conflict, basically. And so what we are presently doing, of course, in cooperation with our partners in DRC, our partners in the region, because it's also a regional issue, it's not only a DRC issue, is to support the churches, support the communities in framing what would peace mean for them in DRC after decades of conflict and not being able to get out of it. And DRC is an example where peace agreements, and there have been many, have not led to peace. But the characteristic of each peace agreement of the DRC is that the local community and that local ownership that we were speaking about in the beginning is not ensured, it's never been there. So this is where we're working and trying to give our contribution to that.
Thank you. I think before we maybe open it to the floor and take questions online, I just want to pose one question to all the panelists. Basically at this time of increasing crisis, what can we do to integrate mine action more into peacemaking strategies? And I think just linked to that, a particular interest also is agreements are one thing, but particularly also the pre-agreement in terms of peace processes, what can be done to integrate mine action better? Maybe we can follow the order of seating, maybe Ambassador. topic.
Okay, with pleasure. And I think it's pretty much also a bit a repetition of what we have already heard this afternoon. And I would put it as such, mine action is not an end in itself. And I think we clearly heard that today, we need to continuously position mine action as a necessary enabler for further peace building and reconstruction. So this is, I believe, very much work in progress. We are in a world in turmoil, and we face unprecedented levels of violence and conflict. And knowing that, I think we also need to know that in the aftermath of conflict, and the more devastating a conflict is, reconstruction cannot start without mine action. I think you also said that, Tobias, that I would think this is really important to know. And for this, it is critical to credibly include mine action into broader strategies of peace building, humanitarian access, and development. So again, having the whole agenda. And when we say we all know that, I think we all agree on this as well here on the panel today. I think it's important that mine actors themselves need to believe in the need to integrate the work into those broader agendas. So my conclusion to your question here would be to say that in the very first place, what is required is a shift in the mindset within the sector itself.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Privatelli.
Thank you. I fully agree. I mean, integration into strategies, then that sort of awareness raising, collecting needs, knowledge on the needs, as Donatella told us. And that's the basis. But then the solution, in my view, should be a technical one. That means the mine action sector is very standardized. There's a lot of experience there. And the approach is relatively technical. Our organization is a humanitarian/technical organization. We have a big international system of mapping mine contamination. It's called IMSMA. It is managed by UNMAS together with us. So the mapping of information is feasible. Every single step in demining is more or less regulated today. Demining by rollers, by human beings, by dogs, by rats. So it's a technical sector. That means if a country is fine with implementing mine clearance, mine action based on a peace agreement, the tools are there. And it is a key mandate of our organization, for instance, to make all tools in mine action available to all affected countries. So that, let's say, technical character of the sector can be beneficial, probably in the implementation phase.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Amentano.
Well, I believe that I can definitely say that there is no magic bullet, and there is no fixed recipe that can be applied and copy pasted in different contexts. Certainly, the example of Colombia can be of much help, and hopefully can also, through the collection of best practices and lessons learned, hopefully help different conflicts to go towards the path of resolution. Then echoing a bit what Ambassador Privitelli was saying just now, I think that there is maybe an overall understanding from the general public that mine action, demining is, of course, a technical activity, a technical task, and definitely it is. But it is also important to look at it from a different perspective and understand that it has also a very important political role in the peace negotiation and in the peace building process. Thank you.
Yeah, somehow I'm going to repeat some of the things, of course, that have already been said. I think what is really important in peace processes is, on one side, contextualization. We know that a peace process in DRC is not the same thing as peace process in Mali or in Burkina Faso. So that's very important. And a second element is the political will as well. totally agree that it's also it's a technical issue, but it's a political issue, very much a political issue as well. So how do we do that? I think that we need to reframe, and I think Ambassador was saying that, reframing mine action as a peace building enabler. This would be very important. This is actually vital to ensure that, to restore access to land, to infrastructure, to restore access to land, to build new infrastructure as well. And we work on peace infrastructure a lot in DRC with Interpeace. So this is very important. Facilitating the return of displaced population, building trust in the institutions, building trust among communities. This is a very important. So enabling mine action as an enabler of peace. Embed mine action in peace agreements, in mediation process. Of course, we have said this very much. Ensure local ownership and elevate local voices in policy forums, in peace building, and in peace agreements as well. Very, very important. And then link mine action to the broader stabilization goals of a peace process, like to link it to food security, link it to economic recovery, to public health, to governance, and I would say to governance especially, because governance is a very, bad governance or good governance is where it makes the difference also in a peace building process. So yeah, that would be.
Thank you for that. Maybe now we can take a few questions. Maybe just identify yourself, and I think we may have questions online also. Maybe, please.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for this highly important panel discussion. I'm Alexandra, working for Links Europe, and we recently launched the Landmine Free South Caucasus campaign and framing demining as a confidence building tool. And my question is how to get countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan to engage maybe with the Ottawa Convention and demine border areas, despite other countries having left the Ottawa Convention. Thank you.
Would you like to bundle a few questions, or okay, maybe we can take that. Ambassador Anderton, would you like to have a go with that?
I can try at least. If this would be easy, then I think we wouldn't be sitting here. We all agree that everyone wants to join the conventions. But as you say, we face right now, due to war, of course, but we face the opposite. I can only speak for Switzerland as a party to the Ottawa Convention here, in this case, also the Oslo Convention. The only thing we can do is to stay principled on the importance of international law, of international humanitarian law, and in particular on those two conventions being the pillars of humanitarian law, and try to convince countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, and others that in the end, and in particular in the long run, they can only benefit from that. Now, either they destroy their country, or either they build long-lasting peace and development as well. That sounds very easy, and everybody would say, of course, we all know that. But we know that politically things are much more difficult. The fact that we have now countries who have left or want to leave the Ottawa Convention in particular is in that respect, and against this background, is a worrisome development. Of course it is. And here, what we can do and what we do is also try to talk to those countries, try to convince them from the opposite, and stay also here steadfast in what this means if we want to principled and value the international law and the international order, especially in humanitarian and with regard to the humanitarian principles. It's not much more that I can say, but I think that's what's realistically possible.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists like to add to that? Or? So then maybe I think we have a question there.
Thank you. Thank you. No, this is not a question, but let me, as an ambassador of of Colombia, to express my gratitude for this event and for the important help the United Nations, the government of Switzerland, the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, and to all the governments and the civil society who are supporting us in the country for your help, for your recognition also regarding our efforts to demine our country. These demining actions are possible due to many things, to many activities we have developed as society and the institutions also in Colombia during our protracted conflict since the 60s, last century, till almost today, especially to the peace agreement signed in 2016, which was the result of an important dialogue and difficult dialogue between the government and the FARC, as Antonio said, between 2012 and 2016, and against the opposition of an important part of the country who is not in favor of the peace process. But anyway, the process is still there, and it had the demobilization of about more than 10,000 combatants of the FARC, about 12,000. Some of them has withdrew the agreement, but more than 10,000 still remain committed to the peace process. And some institutions were created by the agreement, as Antonio said also, especially the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, who has issued the first two sentences about that. One of the sentences regarding the responsibility of the Secretariat of the FARC, the more important body governing the FARC before, and they were declared responsible for crimes against humanity. They have recognized these crimes, and they have been committed to contribute to peace activities and to reparation activities, including demining action, and they were condemned to develop actions regarding to demining. And this is very important. The other sentences was related to 12 members of military forces implicated in killings, extrajudicial killings, caught in our country, false positives. They kill people, normal people, civilian people, and they show them as supposed to be guerrillas. That was not true. And so they accepted this responsibility. They were condemned for these actions. And so these are the first two sentences issued 3 weeks ago at the end of September. And this is very important. But all these efforts, all these activities are related to that. And one important part of this is the demining action in our country. We have had demining of about more than 80% of the goal of demining, 83%, about 15 million square meters of demining. But we're still pending about 3 million square meters for demining, about the 17%. And that's why we have demanded extension of the period for demining according to the Ottawa Convention. And but we continue to be committed to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you for this event. Thank you for the references to Colombia. Thank you for your important support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the very insightful intervention. And maybe it's time for one last question.
Thank you. I stayed for the entirety because it was so interesting. Itonde Kakoma with Interpeace here in Geneva. There was a reference to the withdrawal of certain parties, in particular to the Ottawa Convention. And I mention this again because it speaks to a worrying trend, not just in the upholding of international law, but also in terms of the nature of armed conflict. Many analysts, security analysts, just less than a decade ago, would have suggested that the future of war, that is the conduct of hostilities, would be more so and primarily hybrid in nature, not kinetic. And so I'm curious from your point of view, the withdrawal of particular states, many of whom have been vanguards in the upholding of international law, who themselves have fallen victim to the very use of old weapons such as landmines in the not so distant past, speaks to how the changing nature of war is actually both a combination of new forms of technology and very old. When you think of Tigray, you think of Ukraine, you think of Gaza, notwithstanding others, the kinetic way in which force is utilized points to an extremely worrying trend, which is also subject to the use of humans, mostly men, in carrying out the conduct of hostilities, as opposed to new forms of technology in its hybrid form, which is still present. But perhaps I'm just curious to hear your reflections on what these trends mean for the nature and future of war making and the resulting skills required in the advancement of peace. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had one more question. Maybe we can bundle that. Yes.
Hello, and thank you very much for your very excellent interventions. I'm a researcher and trying to further advance mine action into broader peace building processes. So I was just curious, as we all know, Colombia is a very successful case in that through the great work that Humanicemos has been doing. But I was curious if there is any less known examples of mine action being either quietly or more predominantly supporting more local peace building or any other processes of peace building through your experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, you will hopefully find good examples in the study that was published yesterday, but we have a good example with Peru, Ecuador, the cross-border cooperation, which involved also local organizations. And then we have the case of Croatia, which developed after the wars in Yugoslavia, an entire quite big mine action sector with commercial companies, with local NGOs. So I think these are interesting examples. And then, of course, also Cambodia. Maybe quickly on the development of the character of wars. I think you're absolutely right, Itonde, that we see diverging trends in different parts of the world. In 2023, the highest numbers of victims of landmines and explosive ordnance was in Myanmar, according to the Landmine Monitor. This is a country where we have extremely little access and information. So we do not exactly know what kind of mines are being used. We know that they are producing mines, but on the African continent, in many parts, improvised explosive devices are the most frequently used ones. And they're really improvised. They can be produced in a garage, and often they target deliberately civilians. So we saw improvised explosive devices in the form of a school backpack or a Mickey Mouse book and things like that, targeting children and civilians. It's very diverging. So we can have a context of hybrid warfare with artificial intelligence involved at the same time IEDs being used by different groups. It's happening all at the same time. And I think in general, we see, yes, more cruelty, more victims, more suffering, definitely.
Thank you. But Ambassador, would you like to add to that? Or?
No, I think everything has been said. I very much agree with what you're saying. Tonde had this combination now between modern hybrid war and then at the same time coming back on the so-called primitive means on how to make war and what that makes to the population, as always, in particular to civilians. And I think there's so many conflicts where actually we have to witness that. So it's probably more than just a trend, and it's not just in one specific area. This is what is happening, and we need to find the right answers for it. Not so sure if we really have it. I've been myself to Laos, and I served also in Myanmar, and you mentioned it. Laos, till today, the most bombed country in the world. Myanmar, in a terrible situation when it comes to landmines. I think we're only discovering very, very, very slowly what is really happening there. As you say, Tobias, there is no access, there is no information on it. So how to create that access, I think, is something that is important for all of us to know as soon as possible, knowing also that in those countries, nature makes sure that landmines are moving all the time. And where they are today, they will not be anymore tomorrow. You need one typhoon, one cyclone in Myanmar, and the whole landscape, mine landscape, looks very different. So I can only highlight a little bit where the problems are, and also from my own experience, the way I have seen it, the answers are such I don't have it, but fully agree with the analysis.
Would you like, Antonio? Would you like?
Well, in the interest of time, telegraphically, 2 quick points on each question. And so the first one regarding the researcher, I think it's going to be worth, and I would like to advertise also another peace dialogue that is happening in Colombia, precisely in Nariño. So this has been one of the most positive, as you were looking at positive cases, which are not very well known across the globe. And it's with Comuneros del Sur and Coordinadora Bolivariana. So as a result of this big peace negotiation that is ongoing, already a number of landmines and a number of weapons, ammunition, and explosives has been handed over and destroyed by the armed forces. So I would like also to mention this because I think it's a very good case and good result of the good work of the Office of the High Commissioner for Peace, Mr. Oti Patiño in Colombia. And regarding new technologies and new trend, I think unfortunately, on a sad note, Colombia is using now extensively improvised explosive on uncrewed aerial vehicles, the so-called by the press and journalists weaponized drones. So I think this is a growing concern, and actually we're studying or trying to understand at least the situation. So we're going to publish as UNMAS a paper in November. We are developing it in cooperation also with the Ministry of Defense of Colombia, which we thank. And then a quick note also to thank the ambassador for his presence, first of all, the ambassador of the permanent mission to Colombia. I think it speaks highly of the commitment of the government of Colombia towards the demining efforts. And we are happy as UNMAS, together with other institutions like GICHT, like the Swiss government, to support. And I believe this is one more reason that's definitely to keep supporting cooperation and multilateralism. Thank you.
I didn't have questions addressed to me, but maybe, and it's not an answer to it on there, but maybe completing it on this intervention that I agree. And I think part of the problem is also not only the new weapons, but the fact that in many, and probably most of conflict settings, there has not been a specific and well done DDR process that makes old weapons disappear in a conflict context. So there is the new weapons, but then old weapons also have not disappeared. So it's you know, warfare is a combination of the fact that in contexts like PRC, for example, that weapons have never disappeared, also with peace agreements. So war never stops because the weapons are always there. So you can add new weapons, but the old ones keep doing their role, keep playing their role.
Thank you. Maybe just to conclude, I'll just ask each of the panelists to just give one key takeaway, what they would like practitioners and policymakers to take away on the role of mine action in building sustainable peace. Maybe Ambassador Antonio, we can start with you.
Yes, thank you. And maybe coming back on the shift of mine action from the post-conflict recovery and to do mine actually already earlier in the conflict cycle. And I think here, what I would take away is that we need to harness this shift to ensure that mine action is taken into account in peace-building efforts and can play an active role in reconciliation and also in sustainable peace.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Thank you. A very big question. Well, I'll be short. Again, when it comes to the preventative character of mine action, I think if we enforce the Ottawa Convention and the Oslo Convention, as Tim Enderlin said, we contribute to disarmament. So we should also see it as disarmament tool. And disarmament means, as you say, less weapons, less old weapons, destruction of stockpiles, accountability of every country before the other countries. Whenever you want to delay destruction, you have to get an extension request and so on. So let's use these mechanisms to have just simply less landmines and less cluster munition around.
Thank you.
Well, in terms of takeaway, I would use maybe this opportunity to launch maybe an invitation to the public. I think it's going to be very useful to start reflecting more and dive deep into the transcendent role of mine action in the peace building processes, peace negotiation, as we have seen through different examples, through this very interesting discussion that we have today. Of course, we don't have all the solution. There are complex problems, political problems, but definitely a lot of steps forward has been moved. And I mean, if we try to work together for this effort, we definitely can achieve much better. Thank you.
In terms of takeaway, for me, it's clear after today's conversation that clearing landmines is not just about technically, removing explosive, but it's like clearing a path to peace. So mine action should be part of this path to peace. So maybe my plea, Ambassador Privitelli, is that let's continue this conversation between mine action and peace building and how we can maybe collaborate and at least, work together in that sense.
No, thank you. I'd like to just thank all the panelists for making time and for sharing your thoughts, and for the audience for your questions and your participation, and to the organizers, to JICHD for hosting us. I think for particularly me coming from the peacemaking sector, I think this discussion has reinforced the potential for the two sectors to collaborate. I think they both have knowledge and networks in conflict areas, which definitely there are synergies there to be explored. It has been explored before, but I think particularly at this time of dwindling resources and crisis, it's more than ever needed. So I'd just like to thank you all and thank you for addressing this topic. Thank you.